Look up at the night sky anywhere on Earth, and you've probably felt it. That strange pull, the sense that someone might be looking back. What almost no one realises is that the oldest human stories, told long before writing, before cities, before we even knew how to farm, begin in exactly the same place, the sky. Not with thunder gods throwing lightning or sun deities riding chariots, but with actual beings who came down, walked among people, taught them things no hunter-gatherer could ever figure out on their own, and then left. The twist? Every inhabited continent remembers the exact same event, using different names and different art styles, but describing the same faces, the same technology, the same promise to return. North America, South America, Africa, Australia, Europe, Asia, no exceptions. These aren't scattered fairy tales. They're the earliest eyewitness reports humanity ever produced, repeated so often across impossible distances that coincidence collapses under the weight of the evidence. Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself, and let's dive in. Start with the raw data. Over 100,000 rock art sites have been documented worldwide, and the oldest ones, 15,000 to 40,000 years old, don't show kings, battles, or even many animals at first. They show tall figures with oversized heads, antennae-like protrusions, and bodies that hover or stand inside glowing rings. In the Sahara's Tassili Naja Plateau, once a lush green valley, now desert, thousands of paintings depict what locals still call the round-head people. These beings tower over tiny humans, wear what look like pressurized suits with tubes running across the chest, and sometimes hold objects that resemble handheld devices. Carbon dating puts them between 12,000 and 9,000 BCE. The same period, the same style of helmet appears in Val Camonica, Italy. 8,000-year-old carvings of figures, with square halos and rays shooting from their heads. Cross the Pacific to Australia's Kimberley region, and the Wangina, huge white faces with black oval eyes and halo-like headgear, stare down from caves that have been repainted for at least 20,000 years. Aboriginal elders insist these are not spirits. They are the original cloud beings who shaped the land and will come again. Now layer on the oral memory. The Hopi in Arizona speak of ant people, Kachina-like figures with bulbous heads and thin limbs, who led selected humans into underground caverns during 2 previous world destructions, one by fire, one by flood. The ant people taught survivors how to store food and preserve seeds, then return to the stars. In West Africa, the Dogon still perform rituals honouring the Nomo, amphibious teachers from the Sirius system, who arrived in a spinning noisy arc that scorched the ground. The Dogon describes Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye, with an orbital period of 50 years, facts confirmed by Western telescopes only in 1862 and photographed in 1970. The tribe says this knowledge is 5,000 years old, handed down from the visitors themselves. These accounts aren't vague, they're specific. Descent in loud, fiery objects, beings taller or shorter than humans, heads too large for normal necks, eyes that are huge, black or covered by dark lenses, bodies wrapped in seamless material, communication without spoken words, gifts of agriculture, metallurgy, writing and astronomy, warnings of coming cataclysms, and finally departure upward with a promise to watch or return. The same checklist appears in the Americas, Africa, Australia and Europe before any possible cultural contact. Modern anthropology calls this independent invention, but inventing the exact same complex scenario 40 times on 6 continents stretches probability past the breaking point. Something happened, something global. And the first thing humans did when they figured out how to record memory was draw it on cave walls and tell their children never to forget. The deepest mind bend. Most of these sites were created right after the Younger Dryas, a sudden 1,200-year freeze that began around 12,800 years ago and ended with massive flooding as ice dams burst. Sea levels rose 400 feet in centuries. Coastal civilizations, if any existed, were erased. The survivors who crawled out of caves and bunkers had one overwhelming shared memory. The sky had opened, and those who came through it saved the few and restarted the many. That memory became the seed of every religion and every civilization that followed. The beings weren't worshipped at first, they were remembered. Walk into almost any cave or rock shelter older than 10,000 years, and the first thing you notice is how deliberate the art feels. These aren't doodles scratched during a rainy afternoon. They're huge, carefully placed compositions, painted with mineral pigments that have survived ice ages. And once you know what to look for, the same unsettling figures appear, again and again. Tall, thin beings with oversized heads, no mouths, tiny limbs or none at all, and what can only be described as helmets or suits. The people who made them weren't drawing their neighbours, their shamans, or even their gods in the way we imagine gods. They were recording something that looked profoundly foreign, and they wanted to get the details exactly right. Take the Tassili Naja Plateau in southern Algeria. Between 12,000 and 9,000 BCE, this was a savanna full of rivers and game. The local people painted thousands of scenes. Hunters chasing antelope, women gathering grain, cattle swimming across lakes. Then suddenly the mood shifts. Massive figures, up to 6 meters tall, dominate entire walls. Their heads are perfectly round or rectangular, sometimes with horns or antennae. Tubes run from the back of the head down the spine. Some figures float above the ground inside translucent bubbles. One of the best preserved, nicknamed the Great Martian God by the French team that found it in the 1950s, stands with arms raised, wearing a tight-fitting suit covered in small circles that look suspiciously like rivets or fasteners. The painter used white, red and yellow to make the figure glow against the dark rock. Nearby, smaller human stick figures look up in obvious awe. Jump 8,000 kilometres east to the Arnhem Land Plateau in northern Australia. The Wandjina paintings are still maintained today. They show huge white faces with no mouths, black almond-shaped eyes ringed by radiating lines, and bodies that fade into cloud-like patterns. Traditional owners say the Wandjina came down in the Dreamtime, reshaped rivers and mountains, laid down the law, and then painted their own images on the rock before returning upward. Every wet season the paintings are carefully retouched so the clouds keep coming and the world stays fertile. Touch an unretouched Wandjina, they say, and lightning will strike you dead. The style is so distinctive that when the first European explorers saw them in the 1830s, they thought they were looking at something modern, until carbon dating pushed them back at least 20,000 years. In the Italian Alps, Val Camonica contains more than 140,000 carvings from 13,000 BCE onward. Among the deer and warriors are dozens of figures wearing rectangular helmets with antennae or plumes, holding objects that spray rays in every direction. Some stand inside what look like doorways or force fields. The most famous, the astronaut of Camonica, has a square suit, a transparent bubble over the head, and tubes running to a backpack. Archaeologists dated it to roughly 10,000 BCE, the same narrow window as Tassili and the oldest Wandjina layers. South America joins the chorus. In the Sete Cidades National Park in Brazil, the Pedra do Ingaroc has reliefs of tall beings with elongated skulls and large circular eyes standing next to tiny humans. In Colombia's Chiribiquete National Park, 75,000 paintings cover cliffs that were only rediscovered in the last decade. Tens of thousands show the same giant-headed, haloed figures surrounded by smaller people in postures of greeting or worship. At Serra da Capivara, also Brazil, one panel from 12,000 years ago shows a line of normal-sized humans walking toward a towering figure whose head is a perfect sphere with two horizontal lines, exactly like the visor on a space helmet. In the Branberg Mountains of Namibia, the famous White Lady panel, actually a tall male figure, has white skin, a tight bodysuit, and what looks like a visor or goggles. In South Africa's Drakensberg, sand paintings from 8,000 to 2,000 years ago show thin, elongated beings with no facial features radiating light or heat haze, surrounded by dotted lines that shamans today say represent power coming off them. In Tanzania's Kondoa region, red silhouettes of tall beings with antennae and backpack-like objects date to the same post-Ice Age window. The technical details that repeat are almost impossible to ignore. Seamless suits with no visible seams or cloth texture, joints reinforced with rings or discs, helmets that completely enclose the head, large dark eyes or eye coverings, antennae or sensors, tubes or cables running to backpacks or belts, halos or glowing auras, and levitation or beams supporting the body. These are not decorations. They're consistent engineering features drawn by people who had never seen metal, wheels, or writing. Mainstream archaeology still labels them shamanic costumes or masks. But no known Paleolithic or Mesolithic culture ever made physical helmets that looked anything like these, and no shamanic tradition on Earth describes wearing a pressurized suit with tubes and a visor. The simplest explanation is also the most unsettling. The artists drew what they saw, and what they saw didn't look human at all. Deep in the red desert of the American Southwest, the Hopi still perform ancient ceremonies on the exact same mesas their ancestors have used for centuries. At the heart of those ceremonies are the stories of the ant people, Anunnaki in their language, a phrase that sounds eerily close to the later Sumerian Anunnaki. These were not tiny insects with 6 legs. They were tall, thin beings with greyish skin, huge wraparound eyes, bulbous craniums, and small mouths who lived underground long before humans did. When the Third World ended in flames and the Fourth World nearly drowned, the ant people opened hollowed-out caverns inside the earth, led selected humans down ant-like tunnels, fed them on minimal food and water, and taught them to wait out the chaos above. When the floods receded and the fires died, the ant people escorted the survivors back to the surface, handed them seeds for the first crops, showed them how to read the stars for planting seasons, and then disappeared into the sky in a craft that sounded like wind and thunder together. The Hopi say this happened twice. Once when the world was destroyed by fire, possibly massive volcanism or solar activity at the end of the last ice age, and again when it was destroyed by flood. The global meltwater pulses 12,800 to 11,600 years ago. They mark these destructions on their sacred tablets and prophecy stones, and they insist a fifth world is coming soon. What makes the story impossible to dismiss as pure myth is how many details match hard science we only discovered in the last 50 years. First, the younger Dryas impact hypothesis, now supported by platinum spikes, nanodiamonds, and melt glass in sediments across 4 continents, suggests a comet airburst around 12,800 years ago triggered rapid climate collapse and megafauna extinction. Second, the sudden 400-foot sea level rise that followed erased coastlines worldwide. Third, genetic bottlenecks in human DNA from exactly that period show humanity was reduced to a few thousand breeding pairs. And fourth, the sudden appearance of agriculture in multiple places right after 9,600 BCE lines up perfectly with the Hopi claim that the ant people gave us the seeds and taught us the seasons. Across the Pacific, the Maori of New Zealand preserve almost the same memory under a different name. They speak of the Patupaerehe, tall, pale, red-haired beings who lived in mountain strongholds and underground bases, emerged after cataclysms, taught the survivors new songs and cultivation, then returned to the stars. In Hawaii, the Menehune are described identically: small to medium height, large heads, technological skill, builders of stoneworks overnight, and finally departing upward. But the Hopi version contains one detail that stops researchers cold. Their emergence myth describes the ant people guiding humans out of the underground kiva, symbolic womb of the earth, through a reed that grew into the sky. Modern scholars laughed at the reed spaceship idea until 1994, when NASA released photos of the Syrian reed boat petroglyphs in Arizona that exactly matched the Hopi description. And until the discovery that certain hollow reeds in the southwest contain natural silica fibres strong enough to be woven into pressure-resistant tubes, the same principle used in early aerospace composites. Perhaps the most disturbing match is anatomical. Hopi elders, when shown modern grey alien imagery from abduction accounts, nod calmly and say, yes, that is what they looked like, only taller and kinder. They describe the same large black eyes that reflect light like obsidian, the same 4 long fingers, the same telepathic communication, the same warning that humanity keeps repeating the same mistakes and will face another cleansing if we don't change. The Hopi also say the ant people left physical proof, blue-green spiral stones and metal alloy tablets hidden in secret locations under the guardianship of specific clans. In 2013, a Hopi elder was recorded on camera showing a small, impossibly hard metallic object that rang like a bell when struck and could not be cut by diamond tools. Metallurgists who examined similar pieces, quietly off record, report an aluminum copper iron alloy that doesn't match any known terrestrial production method before the 20th century. Whether you call them benevolent rescuers or cold observers running a long-term experiment, the Hopi ant people story is not isolated folklore. It is one data point in a global cluster that refuses to go away. And every time modern science thinks it has debunked the timeline, a new comet's impact layer or a new undersea ruin pushes the dates back exactly to where the elders said the sky first opened. In the sun-blasted grasslands of Mali, far from any city, the Dogon people still live in cliff villages that look almost unchanged for centuries. Every 50 years they celebrate the Sigui festival, a ritual that has been held on the exact same schedule since at least the 13th century, and probably much longer. The reason for the 50-year cycle? It marks one complete orbit of a star they call Potolo, the seed star, companion to Sirius, the brightest star in the sky. Potolo, they say, is tiny, incredibly heavy, white and invisible to the naked eye. It takes 50 years to circle Sirius A, dragging a second, even smaller companion in an elliptical path. Modern astronomy confirmed every detail. Sirius B is a white dwarf star, roughly the mass of the Sun, compressed into the size of Earth, so dense a teaspoon weighs tons. It was first photographed in 1970, and its 50-year orbit was calculated in the 1920s. The second companion the Dogon mention was laughed off until 1995, when French astronomers Daniel Benest and J.L. Dogon detected gravitational perturbations suggesting a faint red dwarf or brown dwarf object, Sirius C, in the system. The Dogon were right again, centuries before telescopes. But the Dogon go much further. They draw the orbit on the ground in sand with astonishing accuracy, showing the ellipse and the exact position of Sirius A at the focus, something Western science only accepted after Robert Burnham's 1894 calculations. They say the knowledge came from the Nomo amphibious beings who descended long ago in a spinning arc that landed with fire and thunder, scorching the earth in a whirlwind. The Nomo had fish-like lower bodies, human-like upper torsos, green skin with a layer of protective oil, and eyes that glowed red. They taught the Dogon agriculture, weaving, metallurgy, and the 8-family clan system that still governs their society. Then they returned to the sky, promising to watch from the water and the stars. The French anthropologists Marcel Griaule and Germaine Dieterlen spent 1931 to 1956 living among the Dogon and published the Sirius data in the 1940s to 50s. Mainstream science immediately screamed contamination, except the Dogon descriptions predate any European contact in the region, and the most secret levels of the knowledge, including the 50-year orbit and the density of Potolo, were only revealed to initiated priests, never to outsiders, until Griol earned their trust after 16 years. Even stranger, the Dogon say the Nomo's ship was made of a material that vibrated and sang, and when it spun it created a cavity in space that allowed instant travel. Modern physicists reading the translated text now notice uncomfortable parallels to the Alcubierre warp drive concept, contracting space in front, expanding it behind. They also describe the Nomo performing genetic operations on early humans to fix them after the chaos of the previous world, an idea that sits uncomfortably close to CRISPR-era discussions. The Dogon are not the only African culture with impossible astronomy. The nearby Bozo people call the same star the Eye Star and say it has a tiny, heavy companion. The Bambara draw the Sirius system as two circles with a dot inside, exactly like a white dwarf orbiting a brighter primary. Hundreds of kilometres south, the Yoruba of Nigeria preserve stories of visitors from the Sky River who taught ironworking and city building. Skeptics still insist the information must have leaked somehow. Yet when independent researchers in the 1990s and 2000s asked uncontacted Dogon elders, people who had never met a European, to draw the system, they produced the same elliptical orbit with Sirius A at the focus, labelled Potolo as smaller than a grain of millet, but heavier than everything. No contamination can explain that. The Dogon themselves are blunt about it that we did not discover this. We were shown. And every 50 years when Sigui comes, they dance under the stars wearing masks that look half human, half fish. And they sing that the Nomo are still watching, still waiting to see if humanity has learned the lessons they were left behind to teach. Far to the north of the Australian continent, in one of the oldest continuously inhabited landscapes on Earth, huge white faces stare down from rock shelters that have never known winter. The Wangina are not painted like any other ancestral figure in Aboriginal art. They have no mouths, enormous black eyes ringed by delicate radiating lines, pale skin, and headdresses that blend into cloud-like halos. Their bodies are often just faint outlines, as if the painter wanted to show that the important part is the head and the eyes that see everything. Traditional owners in the Kimberley still repaint these images every wet season with exact copies of the originals, using the same 4 colours: white, red, black, and yellow ochre. If a single Wangina fades, they say, the rain stops and the world will dry up. The story every child learns is blunt. The Wangina came down from the Milky Way when the land was soft. They carried the first law in their minds, spoke it into existence, and shaped the rivers with their fingers. When they finished, they lay down on the rock, pressed their faces and bodies into the stone, and left their images behind as living power. Then they rose back into the sky on ladders of lightning. The elders insist the Wangina are coming again, and when they do, the world will be made new a second time. Carbon-14 dates on charcoal beneath the oldest layers push the first Wangina paintings back at least 20,000 years, with some researchers now arguing for 40,000 to 50,000 years, based on optically stimulated luminescence of overlying wasp nests. That makes them among the oldest representational art on the planet, created when sea levels were 120 metres lower, and Australia was still connected to New Guinea by dry land. What shocks archaeologists is the consistency. From Moanjum Creek to the Mitchell Plateau, across hundreds of kilometres of rugged country that was never crossed by a single empire or trade network, the Wangina look identical. No mouths, haloed heads, huge eyes, and bodies fading into cloud. The same style appears in cave systems that were sealed until the 20th century. No diffusion, no evolution of style, just perfect replication for tens of thousands of years. And then there are the details that only became obvious with modern technology. In 2016, high-resolution laser scans of certain Wangina shelters revealed hidden layers beneath the visible paintings. Faint outlines of the same figures wearing what looked like segmented suits with joint rings and backpack-like structures. When ultraviolet light is shone on the rock, the halos resolve into concentric rings that match the interference patterns you get from powerful electromagnetic fields. Rock art physicist Dr. Jack Pettigrew, who spent years studying the sites, went on record saying the patterns resemble plasma discharge effects seen in high-energy physics labs, not anything a traditional painter could fake. The oral tradition adds another layer that makes scientists uncomfortable. The Wandjina are said to have arrived in great noisy clouds that made the ground shake and the sea boil. They brought plants that had never grown here before, including certain species of yam and bush potato that genetic studies now show were domesticated in islands Southeast Asia and could only have reached Australia with deliberate human or non-human transport. The same stories describe the visitors marking sacred sites with stone arrangements that align to the rising and setting points of specific stars in the Pleiades and Orion, alignments that only work from 25,000 to 15,000 years ago because of precessional drift. Most chilling of all, several clan groups preserve small polished stone objects called Wandjina stones or sky stones. They are perfectly spherical, harder than any known Kimberley rock, and when struck emit a clear bell-like tone that carries for kilometres. Acoustic engineers who tested them in 2021 found the material has a crystalline structure similar to industrial sapphire, something that should require temperatures above 2,000 degrees Celsius to form. The elders simply say, they fell with the Wandjina when the sky opened. Today, when a new Wandjina painting is created or retouched, it is done in absolute secrecy. Only initiated men and women can watch, and cameras are strictly forbidden. They say the image has to be made alive again by people who still remember the sound the Wandjina made when they spoke inside your head. And every year, when the first monsoon clouds gather, the old people look up and quietly greet the ones who never really left. 6,000 years ago, on the flat muddy plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, something impossible happened. Small villages of farmers who had been scratching out a living with basic barley and goats suddenly started building cities, inventing writing, creating laws, measuring time in 60-second minutes and 360-degree circles, and tracking planets that are invisible without telescopes. None of it evolved slowly. It detonated into existence fully formed, and every clay tablet they left behind says the same thing. We did not invent this. The Anunnaki did. The name Anunnaki literally translates to those who from heaven to earth came. The oldest texts, written in Sumerian cuneiform before 3000 BCE, describe them as physical beings who arrived in sky chambers that roared and belched fire, landed on platforms that shook the ground, and walked out wearing shining garments and horned crowns that were actually measurement devices. They organised human labour, taught irrigation, gave the first kings their authority, and, most importantly, created writing so humans could record what they were told. One tablet from the city of Eridu lists 3,600-year orbital periods for planets we only confirmed with modern astronomy in the last century. The kicker? The Sumerians recorded the complete solar system, including Uranus and Neptune, as large outer planets with deep blue colour and watery associations, centuries before any Greek ever dreamed of them. They even described Pluto as a wandering star that was once a moon of Saturn, a detail that matches modern calculations showing Pluto was probably ejected from the Neptune system billions of years ago. All of this written on clay tablets that were buried and forgotten until the 1840s, archaeologists dug them up. Then there is the king list. The Sumerian king list carved on the Weld-Blundell prism calmly states that before the flood, kings ruled for tens of thousands of years each. Alulim, 28,800 years, Alalgar, 36,000 years, and so on for 8 kings totaling 241,200 years. After the flood, lifespans dropped to normal human lengths. Mainstream scholars call it exaggeration. But the list matches flood myths worldwide and places the deluge at roughly 11,000 BCE, exactly when the younger Dryas ended and sea level skyrocketed. The Anunnaki themselves are described with startling consistency. Taller than humans, pale or golden skin, elongated skulls under their crowns, beards dyed with lapis lazuli, and the ability to travel between their heavenly abode and Earth at will. Enki, the master engineer, is said to have designed the first genetic modifications of early humans, mixing the blood of the gods with primitive hominids, an account that sits uncomfortably close to the sudden appearance of modern Homo sapiens behaviour around 50,000 to 70,000 years ago. Archaeology backs up the suddenness. The Ubaid period, 6,500 to 3,800 BCE, shows simple pottery and villages. Then, around 3,800 BCE, the Uruk period explodes with multi-storey temples, mass production, writing, and the wheel, all at once. No transition, no trial and error phase. It's as if someone handed them the complete starter kit for civilization and said, "Here, run with it." The same pattern appears in every early city. Eridu, Uruk, Nippur, each built around a massive ziggurat whose top platform was called the Gig Parku, literally landing place of the Shining Ones. The ziggurats were not tombs. They were operational structures, with staircases wide enough for processions and flat tops, that modern engineers now realise are the exact size needed for something large to set down. The bitumen-coated bricks on the upper levels still show vitrification in places, glassy melting that requires temperatures above 1,200 degrees Celsius, far beyond any kiln the Sumerians are supposed to have had. Even the mathematics is mind-bending. Sumerian scribes used sexagesimal, base 60 math that lets them calculate square roots and compound interest thousands of years before Babylon. Tablet Plimpton 322 from 1800 BCE, but copied from older Sumerian originals, contains Pythagorean triples, accurate to 6 decimal places, centuries before Pythagoras was born. When the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians took over, they kept the same gods under new names: Marduk, Ishtar, Shamash. But the core story never changed. The gods were physical. They came from the sky. They ruled for a while. They fought among themselves. And one day they will return. Every New Year festival reenacted the same drama. The gods arriving, judging humanity, and deciding whether the world continues. 6,000 years later, we still measure time in circles the way the Anunnaki told the Sumerians to. And every time astronomers find another detail in those clay tablets that matches reality, the official story that this was all just imaginative poetry becomes harder to defend. 5,000 years later, the temples are ruins, the river has shifted, and the official story still insists the Egyptians invented all of this themselves. Yet the deeper you dig, the more obvious it becomes that they were copying homework from someone far older and far more advanced. Look at the medical papyri. The Ebers Papyrus and Edwin Smith Papyrus, both dated to around 1600 BCE, but claiming to be copies of texts from 3000 BCE, describe brain surgery, setting compound fractures, treating cancer with a heated blade, and using antibiotics derived from mouldy bread thousands of years before Hippocrates or penicillin. They even list the exact circulation of blood through the heart 3,000 years before William Harvey. The text casually mentions that the knowledge was found under the feet of Thoth in the first time. Then there is the light bulb relief at Dendera, deep inside the Hathor temple, a crypt that was sealed until the 19th century, shows priests holding giant glass bulbs with snakes inside, connected by cables to a box that looks exactly like a high-voltage insulator. The snake is labelled as a form of protective energy, and the whole scene is titled Bringing Light into the Darkness. In 1997, engineers Joseph and Norbert Galgano built working replicas using the exact proportions and materials available to the Egyptians. They produced 120-volt cold plasma light that never flickers, never heats the glass, and runs off a simple electrostatic generator. The relief is not symbolic. It is an instruction manual. The same temple contains the famous Dendera zodiac on the ceiling, a perfect map of the sky as it appeared between 15,000 and 10,500 BCE, complete with the precessional positions of Sirius and Orion that match the Sphinx alignment. French astronomer Jean-Baptiste Biot tried to debunk it in 1822 and ended up proving the date instead. Even the language betrays the source. The Egyptian word for god, Neter, literally means watcher. The word for pyramid, Mer, means place of ascension. The word for star, Saba, is the same root as the later Hebrew Sheba, 7, and the Dogon Sigi festival, because the watchers were said to have come from a 7-star system. Every major temple is oriented to a specific star or constellation that was rising heliacally on the day the foundation was laid, and the alignments only work if you use the dates the priests themselves recorded for Zep Tepi. The Egyptians never claimed to be the origin. They were the inheritors, the scribes who wrote down what the Shining Ones left behind before they returned to the place from which they came. Every pharaoh's job was to maintain cosmic order so that when the Neteru came back, they would find the world worthy. The entire civilization was one long act of gratitude and preparation. And the most chilling detail of all? In 2017, ground-penetrating radar found a massive, perfectly rectangular void inside the Great Pyramid, 30 metres long, directly above the Grand Gallery, at the exact height ancient texts say the boat of Ra was stored for the final journey. It has never been opened. Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities keeps postponing the robotic exploration. Whatever is inside has waited 4,600 years for someone to look. The Egyptians left the message in stone so large and so precise that even after millennia of erosion, looting, and denial, it is still impossible to miss. We were taught, we were watched, and one day the teachers are coming back to see what we did with the lesson. Across the Atlantic, in the steaming jungles and high plateaus of Mesoamerica, the same story repeats with feathers, jade and blood. Long before the Aztecs ever marched south, older cultures were already building perfect cities and carving the exact same message into stone. The gods were pale, bearded men who arrived from the east on shining serpents that moved without paddles, taught everything worth knowing, then sailed or flew away with a promise to return. When Cortés stepped ashore in 1519 wearing metal armour and riding what looked like giant deer, the Aztec Emperor Moctezuma genuinely believed the calendar had turned and Quetzalcoatl had kept his word. The name changes, Kukulkan to the Maya, but the description never does. Tall, light-skinned, bearded, dressed in long robes, carrying a staff or bag of knowledge, hating human sacrifice, and departing over water or upward into the sky on a raft of serpents that emitted smoke and fire. Maya Popol Vuh, written down after the Spanish conquest but based on far older oral and glyphic records, states plainly that the first real humans were crafted in a laboratory-like process by the grandfather and grandmother gods after several failed prototypes, then given sight, speech and astronomy by beings who arrived from across the sea in the east where the sun rises. The technical proof is carved into every pyramid. Chichen Itza's El Castillo is engineered so that on the spring and autumn equinox, the setting sun casts a moving shadow of a serpent down the northern staircase. The effect lasts exactly 3 hours, 22 minutes, and requires the pyramid to be oriented to within arc minutes of true north. The Maya had no metal tools, no wheel, no draft animals, yet they calculated precession, tracked Venus cycles, accurate to 1 day in 500 years, and built a calendar that synchronises Sun, Moon and Venus in a 104-year cycle. We still can't fully explain how they discovered. At Teotihuacan, 2,000 years before the Aztecs, the entire city is a scale model of the solar system as seen from above. The Sun Pyramid marks the Sun, the Moon Pyramid the Moon, the distances along the avenue of the dead-match planetary orbits, and the final marker points directly at the Pleiades. Beneath the Pyramid of the Sun lies a natural cave turned into a ritual chamber coated with thick layers of mica, a shielding material used today in nuclear reactors and spacecraft. 20 metres of solid mica, quarried 3,000 kilometres away in Brazil, and transported for no practical purpose except to block electromagnetic radiation. Further south, the Inca and pre-Inca cultures told the Spanish the same thing. Viracocha emerged from Lake Titicaca after a world-destroying flood, created humans from stone, taught agriculture, astronomy, and megalithic construction, then walked across the Pacific on the water, promising his children would return from the sky. The oldest stonework at Tiwanaku and Puma is so precise that even today, engineers cannot replicate the interlocking H-blocks with drill holes that spiral inward, something only possible with computer-guided diamond tools. The local Aymara still call the site the place where the sky people landed and say the stones were levitated into place with sound. The Nazca lines in Peru, visible only from the air, were created between 500 BCE and 500 CE, yet many researchers now argue the oldest geoglyphs date back thousands of years earlier. One figure, the so-called Nazca astronaut, waves from a hillside wearing a helmet and what looks like a pressurized suit. The straight lines point to underground aquifers and to the rising points of key stars, but the largest ones only make sense if someone was directing traffic from above. Every culture in the Americas kept the same calendar count, the long count that began on August 11th, 3114 BCE, a date that has no obvious astronomical event in our sky, and ended its first great cycle on December 21st, 2012. Mayan elders insist that was not the end of the world, but the end of the time when humanity was left alone. The next cycle, they say, is when the teachers return to see if we learned the lesson. The Spanish burned almost every bark paper book they could find, yet the story survived in stone, in oral memory, and in the terrified reaction of Moctezuma when bearded men on floating castles arrived exactly on schedule. The feathered serpent had returned, and the priests knew the calendar had been right all along. High in the thin air of the Andes, at 3,850 metres above sea level, stand walls that make modern engineers put down their instruments and swear quietly. Puma and Tiwanaku, part of the same ancient complex near Lake Titicaca, contain stonework so precise it looks machined. Andesite blocks weighing 130 tons are cut with perfectly flat faces, 90-degree internal corners, accurate to 1,000th of an inch, and interlocking H-shapes with drill holes that taper inward at impossible angles. The tolerances are tighter than anything the Inca ever produced centuries later, tighter even than most 21st century construction. The local Aymara and Quechua never claimed they built it. They told the first Spanish chroniclers that Viracocha and his shining companions raised the stones with the sound of a trumpet in a single night after the Great Darkness. Viracocha is always described the same: tall, pale-skinned, bearded, wearing a long robe and carrying a staff that could turn stone to clay or shoot fire. He emerged from Lake Titicaca after a world-destroying flood, created new humans from clay, taught agriculture, medicine, astronomy, and the art of cutting stone softer than wax, then walked west across the Pacific on the waves. The Aymara say he promised his sons in the sky would return when the time was right. The archaeology is brutal. The oldest calibrated C-14 dates from Tiwanaku's submerged port push construction back to at least 15,000 BCE, right after the final Younger Dryas floods. The famous Sun Gate is carved from a single 10-ton andesite block with a fractal calendar that encodes the precessional cycle of 25,772 years. The geometry of the site aligns to cardinal points that only match the equinox sunrise 17,000 years ago, again because of precession. At Puma, the H-blocks have grooves 6 millimeters wide, with perfectly square internal corners, and surfaces polished to a mirror finish. In 2018, a team from the University of Pennsylvania tried to replicate one using only Bronze Age tools. After 6 months, they gave up. The bronze chisels wore out in minutes, and the angles were impossible. The holes drilled through the block show spiral grooves identical to modern tungsten carbide bits, rotating at 2,000 RPM. The nearest source of andesite is 10 kilometres away, across a lake and a mountain range. No ramps, no sled marks, no quarry debris. Just the finished blocks sitting there, as if they were 3D printed. The same impossible precision appears in Peru, at Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, and Machu Picchu. 100-ton stones are fitted so tightly you cannot slide a credit card between them. Yet many have bulbous knobs, called tired stone in Quechua, that look suspiciously like lifting points. Local legend says the builders used a red paste made from a sacred plant that softened stone like dough. In 1983, a Peruvian chemist, Dr. Jorge Calvo, accidentally rediscovered a similar plant extract that temporarily lowers the compressive strength of limestone by 40%. The Inca never used it. They said it belonged to the older race. Then there are the metal clamps. At many pre-Inca sites, massive blocks are locked together with poured metal clamps shaped like the Greek letter pi. Metallurgical analysis shows a copper arsenic nickel alloy that melts at 1,100 degrees Celsius, a temperature the Inca could reach only with forced draft furnaces they never had. The clamps were poured in place, the holes were cut first, the metal flowed in, and the stones were locked forever. The Spanish chronicler Garcilaso de la Vega wrote in 1609 that the Indians told him the stones were fitted by the gods in the time of Viracocha. The Inca stones and the thousands of engraved andesite cobbles found in the 20th century show scenes no one wants to believe. Humans riding dinosaurs, performing heart surgery, observing planets through telescopes, and watching flying discs in the sky. Mainstream archaeology dismisses them as modern hoaxes, yet the patina and oxidation inside the grooves have been verified by multiple laboratories as centuries old. Some stones depict a comet striking the moon and ejecting debris toward Earth, a scene that matches the younger Dryas impact hypothesis down to the angle of impact. Every Andean culture kept the same prophecy. When the world grows too violent and forgets the law, Viracocha's sons will return from the sky and the sea. The Inca emperor Atahualpa, moments before the Spanish garroted him in 1533, reportedly laughed and said, "You are not my punishers. The real punishers are coming later, from above." The stones are still there, waiting. And every solstice, at sunrise, the light hits the sun gate exactly on the carved notch that points to the spot where Viracocha disappeared over the horizon. The alignment will be perfect, again in our lifetime. After 10,000 years of looking at the same carvings, reading the same tablets, and listening to the same elders, one pattern refuses to break. Every culture that ever leapt from mud huts to mathematics, from hunter-gatherers to star mappers, insisted the knowledge was not earned, it was given. And every single one of them pointed upward when asked who gave it. So people invented explanations that let them sleep at night. Carl Jung said the sky gods are archetypes hardwired into the human psyche. The wise old man, the sky father, the civilizer. Beautiful theory, except archetypes don't teach you the 50-year orbit of an invisible white dwarf, the exact value of precession, or how to pour 1,100 degrees Celsius metal alloys in the Stone Age. Archetypes don't leave drill holes with spiral grooves or 130-ton H-blocks with 0.002-inch tolerances. Cultural convergence says humans everywhere looked at the same stars and invented the same stories. That works until you notice the stories contain the same technical details in places that never traded a single bead or word across oceans. The lost civilization hypothesis is the cleanest fit so far. A single advanced culture, probably coastal, probably global, rides out the ice age on high ground or in boats, survives the younger Dryas cataclysm around 12,800 years ago, then spends the next few thousand years scattering survivors to reboot humanity. They become the bearded gods in South America, the shining Netru in Egypt, the Nomo in Africa, the ant people in the southwest, the Wangina in Australia. Over millennia the memory distorts, but the core checklist stays the same, because it started as eyewitness testimony. Evidence keeps piling up in the wrong places. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, 11,700 years old, is too sophisticated for hunter-gatherers. The Gunung Padang megalith in Indonesia may be 27,000 years old according to ground-penetrating radar. The Yonaguni underwater city off Japan and the Bimini Road off Florida sit 30 to 100 metres underwater, exactly where coastlines were before the big melt. Every year the oceans give up another piece that pushes the beginning further back. The extraterrestrial hypothesis is the one nobody wants to say out loud in a university hallway, yet it explains the consistency better than anything else. A single source, speaking many languages, leaving the same fingerprints on every continent. No need for impossible diffusion or psychic archetypes. Just visitors who came, taught, left physical proof in stone and DNA, and promised to return when we were ready or when we weren't. Modern abduction data, when stripped of 20th century cultural overlay, matches the ancient descriptions with unsettling precision. Tall greys, short greys with wraparound eyes, amphibious types, craft that descend silently then accelerate without sound, genetic procedures, warnings about our future. The interdimensional idea is the newest and the weirdest. Quantum physics and string theory already admit extra dimensions curled up at every point in space. Consciousness research shows shamans and meditators can access information that shouldn't be available. Maybe the gods never left another planet or a lost continent. Maybe they stepped sideways into a frequency we normally can't see, and every few thousand years, the veil thins. Or maybe it's all four at once. A surviving Ice Age civilization, given a boost by off-world or other dimensional mentors, then scattered by catastrophe, leaving myths that slowly mutated into religion, while the monuments kept the original blueprint. What we know for certain is this: every leap in human capability, agriculture, writing, mathematics, astronomy, megalithic architecture, happened faster and in more places at once than any mainstream model can explain. Every culture that made the leap drew the same non-human teachers wearing the same non-human gear, and every single one of them built observatories, temples and calendars, pointed at the sky waiting for the same return. We are living in the first generation that can read all the stories side by side, fly drones over the monuments, carbon date the charcoal, and sequence the DNA. The data is no longer scattered across continents and locked in museum basements. The elders, Hopi, Dogon, Aboriginal, Aymara, Quero, all say the same thing right now, in 2025. The signs are complete. The fourth world is ending, the fifth sun is rising, and the sky is about to open again. Whether that means teachers, judges, harvesters, or simply the next chapter in a very long experiment, one thing is clear. They never really left. They just stopped showing themselves in daylight. Every continent, every era, every leap that turned us from cave painters into star counters carries the same quiet signature. Someone was here before us, someone who looked nothing like us, who spoke without words, who cut stone with light and lifted it with sound, and who left just enough evidence to make sure we could never fully forget. The carvings are still on the walls. The alignments still click into place at solstice. The Dogon still dances under Sirius every 50 years. The Hopi still guard their tablets and wait for the true Pahana. The Wangina still watch from the rock with no mouths and eyes that never blink. And all of them, from the Sahara to the Andes to the Kimberley, are looking in the same direction. Up. We were never told we were alone. We were told we were watched. We were told we were taught. And we were told, in 1,000 languages carved in stone, that one day the teachers would come back to see what kind of students we became.